seats and, gave money, gave more money so they could pick where they got to sit, And, I remember reading about a young Marine who joined up, and he learned how to spit shine his shoes, organize his locker neatly, fold his pants with a crease, and make a bed that it was so tight that if you dropped a quarter on it, it would bounce waist high. But when this same man left the Marines and went to college, his room was a mess. Not in any kind of order at all. He didn't make his bed for weeks at a time. The floor was covered with torn blue jeans, grubby t-shirts, dirty underwear, and the crust of pizzas. Now I ask you, how is it that a young man who knew how to spit shine his shoes, knew how to be prim and proper when he was dressed, could end up with clothes all over his room, not making his bed? But the answer is simple. Although he knows how to do all that stuff, he knows how to do it and all that, and he understands what it takes to live a neat life, he does not value living that way. Knowledge is not enough. And sometimes we live our Christian lives that way. Sometimes we may have great Bible knowledge. Knowledge understands things, but the value of those things transforms our lives, is what it does for us. I think that this is critically important for us as a church family. Knowing what we should do is not enough. If we don't hold the values of what we learn, that we have the knowledge of, deeply in our minds and our hearts, if we hold these values, guess what? We could be unstoppable in God's eyes. But if we do not, we will be just like that young Marine. Our room and our house will be in a mess. It won't be tidy. We need to be people in this congregation. We need to be people that are helping other people make it to heaven. We need to make that our goal, that we're going to do that. Today we're going to talk about James and John. Not Jimmy and Johnny, because they were called the sons of thunder, and you really couldn't use Jimmy and Johnny. These two apostles were among the closest of Jesus' followers and friends. Why do we speak of them today? Let's look at their lives and see how they become servants of the Lord Jesus. We will see how Jesus changes them from the type of men who proudly demand, "What can I get?" and instead made them into the kind of men that would humbly bow before the Lord and whisper, "What can I give?" Let's turn our Bibles to Matthew chapter 20. Matthew chapter 20. And we'll start with the 20th verse. Matthew chapter 20. And we'll start with the 20th verse. And the subtitle of that section of Scripture there is, "Greatness is Serving." Then the mother of Zebedee's son came to him with her sons, kneeling down and asking something from him. And he said to her, "What do you wish?" She said to him, "Grant that these two sons of mine may sit, one on your right hand and the other on the left, in your kingdom." Now, a little footnote here. She thought that the kingdom was going to be here on earth. That's just a footnote from the thing. They wanted, if that was the fact, they wanted the best seats in the house. Just like they were taught and learned in the synagogue, because they were Jewish. They learned that them front seats were really cherished. Them people wanted to sit there because that was a sign of prestige. James and John were called the sons of thunder, which ought to tell us something about their demeanor and their explosive natures. These guys were brothers and were probably extremely competitive. I don't know of anybody that if two brothers are raised together that they don't compete and want to beat each other out. Me and my brother were so far apart that he was married by the time I was 6. So, I didn't get a chance to compete with him. So, but that competitiveness, it just comes with being brothers and being brothers. And now this stage mom, Zebedee's wife, they had to have their stage mom ask Jesus for the best seats in the house. What do you think that was? The best seats in his coming kingdom. That's what they wanted. Now, why do you think that was? The passage illustrates something that I keep telling people. The Bible deals with the stuff that you and I deal with all the time. We can recognize ourselves from that book. And we can say, been there, done that. Been there, done that, sadly, but we can say that. And even the good things, though, we can say things about the good things. Been there, done that. In this case, it's two guys who's allowing their ambitions to cloud the really important stuff. You got to admit, this doesn't put James and John in a very good light, because we got to remember, how long's the Bible been around? That story's been in there all that time, and people have read about how they acted. And now we've got the record of the Bible. It's printed, and their mom asking this special favor, and the rest of the gang. If we read on in that chapter, we'll find out that the rest of the gang jumped all over them about it because they thought they were trying to step themselves up above everyone else, which they were. Now James and John having this hanging over their heads forever. And I think it adds credibility to James also and John, because we get to see what God does in them. Went from being that, they were transformed. What I meant about values transformed. So when they started valuing Jesus and valuing what he was saying, then it transformed them into what they needed to be. And God's going to do that to them. So it also adds to the credibility of the Bible, because it doesn't hide the feelings of these guys. The Bible doesn't hide anything from us. If they're bad, whether they end up good or not, if they're bad, then they're going to be, it's going to be road. And that's the way God does it. So, and they were two of the leading apostles. To me, this is just more proof of the reliability of the book. It tells the whole truth, even when it isn't pretty. I mean, if I was the author, it would be awful easy. If I was trying to make the Bible look good, maybe I'll leave that part out. I just won't write about that. One thing that no one can accuse the Bible of is that they one of the sweet seats. But back in their defense, back in chapter 19, Jesus told the disciples they would sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And James and John were hoping to get the best seats in the house. These two of Jesus' closest disciples, with only Peter being equal to them in terms of access, because they spent time time with him away from all the others. Sometimes Jesus would take these three away to be with him while the others were left behind. They were part of the inner circle. Peter, James, and John got to witness Jesus raising a young girl from the dead. They got to witness his miraculous transfiguration in the presence of the Old Testament prophets on the mountain when he showed all white. So it might be understandable that they would think that Jesus might have a special place for them. James and John thought that they had the inside track. They thought that they would be glorified. And they probably were when they were taken into heaven when they died. They were probably glorified because of the work they did here on earth for God. They were a little uncomfortable with the idea how to put the key questions, so one of them said, "Let's take Mommy with us. She'll do it for us. What do you think?" And who better to have do the asking than Mom? It's possible that she may have even been Jesus' aunt, one of Mary's sisters. So there's another connection they might be able to take advantage of. And besides, who's going to turn down the mummy of two of his favorite disciples, right? Well, they're about to find out that even mums can't get their boys everything. Jesus is about to teach them a lesson that would turn their definition of greatness and significance on its head. Matthew 20, 22 through 23, if you're still there. But Jesus answered and said, "You do not know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I am able to drink, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with?" They said to him, "We are able." So he said to them, "You will indeed drink my cup, and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with. But to sit on my right hand and my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared by my Father." Can you drink the cup that I'm about to drink? They didn't know what that cup actually meant. They really didn't, because if they did, they may have ran away. Let's face it. But they were strong. They stuck to it. The cup Jesus is referring to is a suffering that he's going to go through on the cross. And the suffering that he's going to go through. It's the cup that he asked the Father to take away from him when he was praying. Drops of blood was coming out of his forehead. He was under stress, mental stress. And he asked God to take it away. He was asking them, were they up to the task of suffering on his behalf? They answered that they were, and they both would, really. James was the first apostle that was martyred. And he was killed in AD 42, shortly before Passover. James was beheaded. That's found in Acts chapter 12. James was beheaded by order of King Herod Agrippa I. John writes in Revelations that he was on the island of Patmos, near Ephesus, where he was exiled for the remainder of his life. So they think they're qualified maybe to have those seats next to Jesus. But it's not the seats that we're really talking about. It's more the ego of man, more than that's what we're talking about in this story. It's from those first verses that we find the first lesson we can learn from Jesus. The servant does not determine the reward. God does. Let me read that to you again. The servant does not determine the reward. God does. There is no denying that these fellows had worked hard. They had completed the assignment Jesus had given them. They had success in them. They were highly profiled guys who thought they should have a high-profile reward. But like the workers in the parable of the vineyard, James and John were going to get what the Father had determined for them, not what they thought they had coming or earned from their service. We can't earn our way into heaven by our service. I want you to do as much as you possibly can for God, but none of it is going to earn you a better seating in heaven. But you know what? If there was a tier of seating in heaven, you could give me the last seat and be fine with me. You can give me that last row seat. It'd be just fine with me. In truth, Jesus' answered here shows that he himself was submissive to his Father, because what did he tell him? It's not for me to give. It's for God. God is going to determine all of that. And that included who would get the reward in the end. We as servants of God, let's read Luke 17, 7 through 10, if you want to turn to that with me. Luke 17, 7 through 10. And which of you, having a servant, plowing or tending sheep, will say to him, when he has come in from the field, come at once and sit down to eat? But will he not rather say to him, prepare something for my supper, and gird yourself and serve me till I have eaten and drunk? And afterwards you will eat and drink. Does he thank that servant because he did the things that were commanded him? I think not. So I likewise you, when you have done all those things which you are commanded, say, we are unprofitable servants. We have done what was our duty to do. It's our duty to take as many people to heaven with us as we can. We need to take that duty seriously if we're going to build the church. Putting others in their needs ahead of yours is how God's going to honor us. He's going to honor us when we do those things. Going about the Father's business with regard to recognition or earthly honor, that's what we must do. We are simply servants, and we do our duty. That's what Jesus is telling us in that Luke passage. Let me encourage you with something here. You may never get the kind of recognition or applause, as I said before, that you might have coming. But Jesus tells us that God, as I mentioned before, God sees the things that we do in secret. God is aware of whatever we do and where we do it. As Rick Warren says, there are 750 halls of fame in America and 450 Who's Who publications. But you won't find any real servants in those places. Notoriety means nothing to real servants because they know the difference between prominence and significance. You are never more like God than when you serve. And I want you to notice something about Jesus' answer. Jesus didn't ridicule James and John for asking, even though he denied their request. It's an illustration of the fact that we feel free to ask God for anything, and we should feel free to ask it. But he might say no. God wants to give us what is best for us, not just what we want. Here's the second lesson we can learn from this conversation. God puts the greatest significance on serving. Back in Matthew 20, going down through 24 through 28. And when the 10 heard it, they were greatly displeased with the two brothers. But Jesus called them to himself and said, you know that the ruler of the Gentiles lords it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you, but whoever desires to be great among you, let him be your servant. And whosoever desires to be first among you, let him be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give life a ransom for many. He gave his life for us. He gave that ransom. Jesus always starts a discussion with something that the people already knew. That the order of things in earthly kingdoms was the greatest bestowed on the rulers and the high officials. And then he mentioned that in God's kingdom, it's entirely the opposite. Greatness is bestowed on the servants. The true leaders place his or her needs last, as Jesus emphasized in his life and his death. Being a servant doesn't mean occupying a servant-type position. Instead, it means having an attitude of life that attends to others' needs without expecting or demanding anything in return. When Mary and I were first married, things were great. Still are. We're happily married. We had only each other, and my wife really catered to me, and still does, which is really great. I'm sorry she left the room, but I'll have to read it to her later. We decided that we would wait to have children. I got pretty used to just her and I. Then Doug Jr. came along. I soon discovered that babies are pretty selfish. And I also discovered that I was too when it came to Mary's time. But I also discovered who was going to win that battle. Babies are not only the cutest creatures on the face of the earth, but are by far the most selfish. And with that said, that meant that somebody in the family was going to have to grow up. Guess who that was? The other one was going to grow up, but I had to grow up right then. Remember, greatness in the kingdom is found in being a servant for the kingdom. And often that service is rendered in areas that bring little attention, like serving in the nursery. I found this story about the nursery. It's by Elmer Towns. It tells about a member of a motorcycle gang who was converted to Jesus Christ dramatically. And the first Sunday he did the only thing he knew he should do, so he went to church. Nobody in the church knew him, and he walked down to the second row aisle and sat in the seat. And the people stared because he looked the part. Big, burly, bearded, long hair, black jacket, tattoos. It comes to announcement time, and the minister got up and made an appeal for nursery workers. And he said, we need someone to work in the nursery. But no one would move. No one would volunteer. He asked a second time, we really need someone to be with our kids in the nursery. But no one would volunteer. And the cyclist prayed, Lord, I want to do what you want me to do. And if you want me to do work in the nursery, just have the preacher ask the third time. And the third time the preacher said, please, we need someone to work in the nursery. And the cyclist raised his hand, nodded his head, and started towards the nursery. And immediately 50 mothers got up and headed for the nursery. As we read that story, we have to think about what we think about people. You know, what do we actually perceive about a person when they become a Christian? God sees us all as the same people. No black, no white, no Indian. There's no difference in any of us. Especially when we become part of His family, we become Christians. There's no, I'm not higher than you are because I'm up here preaching. Tim's not higher than you are because he's up there leading the singing, or if you stand up to lead a prayer, or whatever you do. You're not higher than everyone else. You're in God's service. And that's what we have to do. In Hebrews 6:10 it reads, for God is not unjust to forget your work and labor of love which you have shown towards His name, in that you have ministered to the saints and do minister. Let's think about this message this morning. How can we be a server? I want to close with this story. It's entitled, I Saw Jesus This Week. I saw Jesus last week. He was wearing blue jeans and an old shirt. He was up at the church building. He was alone and working hard. For just a minute, he looked like one of our members, but it was Jesus. I could tell by his smile. I saw Jesus last Sunday. He was teaching a Bible class. He didn't talk real loud or use long words, but you could tell he believed what he said. For just a minute, he looked like my Sunday school teacher. But it was Jesus. I could tell by his loving voice. I saw Jesus yesterday. He was at the hospital visiting a friend who was sick. They prayed together quietly. For just a minute, he looked like Brother Jones. But it was Jesus, because I could tell by the tears in his eyes. I saw Jesus this morning. He was in my kitchen making breakfast and fixing me a special lunch. For just a minute, he looked like my mom. But it was Jesus. I could feel the love in his heart. I see Jesus everywhere, taking food to the sick, welcoming others to his home, being friendly to a newcomer. And for just a minute, I think he's someone I know. But it's always Jesus. I can tell by the way he serves. My prayer for this week is that someone will see you or me out in public and mistake us for Jesus because of the acts that we're doing. The older I get, the more emotional I get. But as I read that story, I couldn't even read it at my desk without tearing up because it's so true. You know what I mean? And if you've ever had the experience of someone questioning you about something good you did, or someone walking up to you and saying, "You're a Christian, aren't you?" And then you say, "Why?" And then they say, "Well, I can tell by the way you live your life." Are we doing that out in public? Are we actually doing that? Are we living in such a way that people can see Jesus in us? Let's try this week. Let's pray about it. I'll pray for you. You pray for me. I had to go pick up my car from the dealership the other day, and I was hot. I even took Jason with me. I said, "Jason, you go with me to keep me calm." But then when I got to the dealership, Jason pulled up, and I told Jason, I said, "Just stay here, I got it." And I went in and I acted like a Christian. Do you understand what that means to God? That means that you value his word. And you value that sacrifice that he gave that we just remember. We value that. That's why we're here on Sunday morning and for classes and 3 times a week. That's why we're here. Because we value those things that make us live like Christ. What value do you put on that? Is it more valuable than anything else in your life? Or can something get in the way to keep you from that being valuable? God gave us a gift. He gave us Jesus to die on the cross for our sins. Without that gift, we'd still be butchering animals on an altar and trying to make sure that we gave every penny that we had to give up to what God said to give in order to make it into heaven. But God gave us that gift. If you're here this morning and you need to receive that gift, you need to be baptized into Christ, you can come this morning and we can do that. Or if you've already been baptized into Christ and you have not put the value you should on what Jesus gave us, what God gave us through Jesus, come as we stand and sing and we'll pray with you. Okay?